everyone. Welcome to Parley, the Hindu's weekly podcast. I am Vijaita Singh, your host for today. On June 16, the Registrar General of India, under the Union Ministry of Home Affairs, issued a notification that India's population will be counted during the year 2027. The announcement came after a gap of 16 years, as the last census was held in the year 2011. Government wanted to count its population in 2021, but it was indefinitely delayed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Even after the pandemic was over, the population census was not conducted. This time, following demands by the opposition parties, among other reasons, government has also decided to enumerate caste, a first in independent India. The question we're discussing today is, was the census deliberately delayed? To discuss this, we have with us today Professor Sanjay Kumar, Co-Director Lokniti, Center for the Study of Developing Societies. The other guest is Poonam Muttreja, Executive Director, Population Foundation of India. Professor Sanjay, I would like to start with you. Why do you think was the census delayed?
The obvious reason is known to everyone that the census should have taken place in 2021, but that was the time of pandemic. And since many things were stalled, nothing was happening. In a sense, it was kind of a lockdown. So census could not take place in 2021.
Okay, do you see any political reasons behind it that they wanted to time it with the delimitation exercise?
I can't see a connection between why it was delayed, but yes, I don't even have an explanation that if you think of the pandemic time, the pandemic was over by mid 2022 or latest by 20 end of 2022. Universities got opened, schools were on a normal routine. We were all attending our office. Everybody was attending a normal routine work. After that, the delay for 3 years, almost 2.5, 3 years, that's unexplainable. I'm not sure why government did not take an initiative earlier in order to like start doing the census work. I don't think it is because the delimitation has to take place by 2026. That's why it was delayed, because every time delimitation takes place they uses the previous census data. So it could have started, census could have started in 2023 as well. Even if it is starting in 2025, it would have made no difference for the work of delimitation.
Right. Poonam, I would like to come to you. Uh, can you tell us about the implications of a delayed census?
Yeah, so the delay in conducting the census, originally due, as was said, in 2021, has serious governance and development consequences. India is operating on 2011 data, and we are in 2025, while the ground reality has changed dramatically. Population growth, if you look at population growth, internal migration, urbanization, shifting fertility patterns have all accelerated. But policy continues to run an outdated assumption on outdated assumptions. So this delay affects nearly every sector, whether it's school enrollment projections, which are now inaccurate, vaccine coverage targets, miss the mark, and social welfare programs like PDS, Manrega cannot adjust to actual population needs in the meantime. So if we are giving rations to 18 million people, do we have, is the number more, is the number less? Likely less. Also, finally, it even affects disaster preparedness and infrastructure planning. We are essentially planning with what should be called blunt tools without knowing where people are, what they need, and how vulnerable they are.
Right. And also, Poonam, this is going to be the first digital census in the country.
Yeah.
Do you see any problems with that? How will it be done?
Digitization is a step forward. It can bring efficiency, reduce manual error, and allow faster data processing. But a fully digital census also risks excluding the very people who are hardest to reach, like rural households, informal settlements, and marginalized communities who may not have smartphones, stable electricity, or digital access and literacy. Also, we are talking about 30 lakh enumerators who are going to be trained in how to do the digital data collection. And for them to get the accuracy right, we have to really, the enumerators are trained normally for 9 months to additional digital training. I mean, I hope we have 30 lakh qualified digital users or people familiar who we are using. Second, my worry is that it was mentioned in the papers that once these caste census, the census was announced, and that it would be a digital census, it was mentioned that apps will be given to people to fill the data themselves. And this would be very difficult for many women, communities that do not have, as I said, access to smartphones or cell phones. I hope we won't leave them behind. We also know that rural women use the internet much less. Only 33% of rural women use the internet, and mobile phone ownership is significantly lower amongst women in low income households. A digital first approach without safeguards could reinforce existing gender, class, geographic inequalities in the data collection. And also, to succeed, the census must retain door to door, in person enumeration, especially in low access areas. And the enumerators must be trained to work with diverse populations in their regional languages, and with an inclusive approach. And technology should support, not replace, the human engagement that is essential to accurate data collection.
Till now, we do not have a clarity from the government on how the self enumeration will go about. According to the plans that government had for the 2021 census, this self enumeration was dependent on a person or a resident updating his or her national population register details, as government already has 119 crore data of 119 crore residents. So, self enumeration is incumbent upon taking part in the NPR process. And in the past, we have seen that there has been a lot of opposition to NPR because it is the first step towards creation of a national register of citizens. So, Professor Kumar, do you see, if the government has not announced yet if they want to go ahead with the NPR, but do you think if the two are combined, NPR and population census, then it may impact the process because of the controversies and the, I would say, misinformation around NPR?
It could result in several problems. First, if you try and do one work at a time, and if you try to combine the other work along with the work which you are doing, the core work, there is a possibility that both the work gets hampered. So if you're trying to combine two activities at the same time, there are possibilities that things will get delayed, and maybe some information will be misrepresented. So there are possibilities of various kinds of ifs and buts if two things are combined.
Okay, but do you see center not going ahead with NPR so that census is done in a very hassle-free manner? Is there a possibility?
I would be in favor of getting the census done separately, because we should not forget that this census is being undertaken after a very, very long time, 16 years. And I'm also not sure. See, we have a cycle of conducting the census after every 10 years. It should have been conducted in 2021, but we all know that the government was not able to carry the census forward because of obvious reason. Now, if the census start taking place in 2025, I can see the data will be in public domain by 2027. When does the next census take place? Whether it will take place in 2031, or if we are going to permanently have a new cycle, whether it will happen only in 2035. So these clarity needs to be there in the public. But more than that, since this is an important census for two reasons. One, I have already stated, it is being done after 16 years. And this is a census when a caste census is also taking place. So one new element is already there in this census. Why to overburden? Why to, add the burden of the enumerators by, doing NPR and census both together? So I am always in favor of getting this census done separately, maintain the sanctity of the census, and try and get it done separately.
So you mentioned about caste census, and since you study people and you study societies and the psychological impact of it, uh, how difficult or easy will it be for the government to collect data on caste? Because we saw in the socioeconomic caste census, which was done in 2011, there were around 40 lakh names which were thrown up. And so there were cases when people, instead of their community, they were writing their surnames. So that added to the number, and it was self disclosure. So there was no list given to them, there was no such predetermined names. So, what could be the methodology that the government can follow to make this a very, a robust kind of data?
See, if we are raising questions about the caste data, we can raise question about any other information which is being connected. It is connected to the question which Poonamji was raising. It is about the training. If we are able to train our enumerators well, most of the questions are, like the respondent, the people tell them tell their views or their about their assets, age, gender, education, everything. The information is given by the respondent to the enumerator. So, like any other information, if you are asking about age, gender, education, caste, family members, what do you do? Have you migrated? All kinds of information. Those are all spelled out by the the people who from whom we are collecting, the enumerators are collecting the data. I don't see any issue, no problem about why people will be why first, why there would be a difficulty in asking the question about caste. There should not be any difficulty when you have no difficulty about asking a question about your assets, about your income, and about several other questions. I see no issue, no problem, no hesitation, no social taboo about asking a question about caste. Why do we? You mentioned that there is no list. I don't think that you need any list. If you ask my name, do I need a list to figure out what is my name? I know my name, I know my caste, I know my age, and I know several other things about my household. I would also know my caste. But yes, training is important. That if people are saying the surname, and that is why we are stressing, at least I am with Poonamji on this, that training is very important. The enumerators needs to know that Verma, Sinha, Singh, and several other surnames. These are surnames, these are not caste. So, if a respondent mentions the surname, there has to be a follow-up question. We are not interested in surname. We would like to know the caste. So that way, like for many other questions, there are follow-ups for caste also. If enumerators are willing to do the follow-up, they should be able to collect the caste data uh, as properly as they will collect any other data.
Right. Poonam, do you think collecting? I'll repeat the question to you. Do you think this enumerating caste will be an easy job for the government, since you also work with communities?
Yes, I agree with Sanjay that asking for the caste is not going to be the difficult one. But we know that other questions, Sanjay ji may know better than me what happened when Congress party or UPA government did a caste census in almost a decade ago, but never released, more than a decade ago, but never released the numbers. There was problem with collecting the caste data. It's not the embarrassment or difficulty in asking the questions. but there are, given the number of subcastes and categories and OBCs and so on, even the British, when they did in 1936 the caste data, you can look at the debates and discussions in methodology. So the methodology we have to learn from what happened in 36, what were the challenges then, and also the UPA caste data, which I understand was not released because of problems with the data. So all that, I think homework needs to be done well as we collect the data on castes. And the enumerators must understand all the subcategories. So unless they themselves are well informed, they are not going to be able to deal with erroneous answers or inappropriate answers or misinformation that is not intended by the respondent, but we need to, especially in the subcategories, I think we have to have our methodology and planning very carefully done, learning from the previous caste censuses, you can learn from the mistakes as well as from what works.
Right. Professor Sanjay, since this particular census, as I mentioned earlier, it could impact the delimitation exercise also. And since it is being done digitally, the data will be available faster. So, do you think a possibility of delimitation of parliamentary and assembly seats before the 2029 elections, general elections? And there is also a concern by the southern states that this entire process should not only be population based, because they arrested the growth of population through various, education, through other means, and so they should not be punished for that. So, what is your take on that?
Oh, many questions in this question. First, the delimitation will be affected by census. It will not be affected by census. Delimitation requires the most updated information about the population. So what the census will do, the census data is the basic tool for doing the delimitation, because in the past there are several criteria for doing delimitation, but one essential criteria is the population of each and every district, population of each and every block, and population of each and every assembly and parliamentary constituency. So the delimitation exercise will take place only and only after the new census takes place and we get the fresh data. After digitization, I think the data is going to be released much faster compared to what has been the case in the past. So the delimitation exercise can begin much sooner compared to waiting for the entire census to take place. The other question about delimitation, yes, in the past, all the 4 or 5 delimitation which has happened in the past uses population as the basic criteria. The basic criteria of delimitation, what does delimitation do? The basic thing that delimitation do is to divide the constituencies, whether it is assembly constituencies and parliamentary constituency, in equal seat population ratio. So every constituency should have more or less similar population, and there are exceptions about the hilly states, exception about states of the northeast. That's the basic exercise, and there are intricacies about that. If the delimitation take place keeping that principles in mind, only and only that principles in mind, southern state or the states which has less population growth rate are bound to lose. There is no way they will gain. And the states where population growth rate has been much higher compared to other states, that will gain. And that is why the southern states where population growth rate has been less compared to the states in the north, they are demanding that there should be a different criteria used for delimitation when the new delimitation take place. At the moment, I have no idea. I think nobody has an idea what criteria will be used for delimitation. Once delimitation notification comes into place, we would get to know what criteria will be used for doing the delimitation in 2026.
And since the women's reservation bill is also dependent on this.
It's not dependent on this. It's wrong to assume that it is dependent on this. What does Women Reservation Bill says? Women Reservation Bill says one third of the seats should be reserved in the parliament. So if in your office there are 100 seats, and if you want to reserve one third of the positions for the women, you can reserve 33 seats for women. But if you say, no, we will reserve only one third of the seats for women in my office, only if the office strength goes up to 200. So the delimitation, it is expected that delimitation will increase the strength of the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha. So it is becoming convenient for those who are already occupying the positions in the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha by winning the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha seats. So the whole idea is that don't apply 33% reservation on the current strength of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, because that is going to annoy a very large number of male representatives, because they would get hampered. So increase the size of the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, increase the size of the house, at least to such an extent that male members still have 543 seats in the Lok Sabha and 245 seats in the Rajya Sabha, and at least one third seats should be increased, so that those, not those, but at least one third of the seats can be reserved for women. It is not connected. It's not that you cannot implement women reservation bill without doing the delimitation. There is no connection to that.
Because I think the bill said that it will be based on the latest delimitation, next delimitation exercise, which will be held, which is frozen till 2026. And if I correctly understand, the exercise can only be taken after the uh, on the latest census data, which is to be conducted during 2027.
No, there are few connections. I am not sure whether actually the bill says that it will take place, it will be implemented only and only after the new delimitation. If that's the case, then yes, the women reservation bill needs to wait for the new delimitation to take place for implementation. But there is also a possibility. You do a delimitation. Last delimitation took place in 2008, 8 and 9. The 2009 Lok Sabha election was the first election after the new delimitation, which took place in 2008. And there was no increase in the number of seats. So there is a possibility, which is not going to be the case, I know. There is a possibility you do the delimitation in 2026, which might come into effect in 2028 without increasing the size of the house. And you can still implement the women reservation bill. That you can always do that. So just figuring out a connection that the delimitation, the implementation of women reservation is entirely dependent upon the new delimitation, I think we need to look at it carefully. Second, delimitation, there is a moratorium fixed on delimitation that it cannot take place before 2026. It is not connected to census. Suppose census doesn't take place till 2031. Still, either the government has to legislate, come out with an order that delimitation will be extended, it will not take place in 2026. But in case government want to go ahead with the delimitation, don't want to go ahead with the census, then the delimitation will take place with using the previous census data. So the connection is, in a sense, delimitation, the whole meaningful exercise of delimitation is only if you have the latest data of population. If you don't have the latest data of population, it makes no sense.
Right. Poonam, I would like to ask you, have you come across specific cases where lack of latest population data has impacted how policies are shaped, particularly impacting the women and children?
So, we all know that the census is the single most important source of data for any country's planning. It provides the foundation for everything from how budgets are allocated, distributed, to where schools, hospitals are built, to how voting districts are drawn, etc. So, in a country as large and diverse as India, it's how we understand first inequality. It also, without census data, we cannot plan equitably or respond to emerging needs. As I said earlier, it's also implications beyond policy for the most marginalized communities. And inclusion in the census is just a first step towards inclusion in the state's imagination and response. And in terms of specifically answering the question you asked, absolutely, one of the clearest examples is in sexual and reproductive health, women's health. Without a granular data on who is accessing services like contraception or maternal care, many policies assume uniformity, but the reality is very unequal. NFHS 5 revealed that only 55% of scheduled caste women and 58% of scheduled tribe women receive adequate antenatal care, compared to 64% in the general category of women. But without caste and location wise breakdowns, uh, national health programs often fail to target the women who need it the most. In many cases, data collection tools themselves ignore women's unpaid work, decision-making power, or experience of violence, which leads to underfunding and weak policy design. For example, invisible caregiving work by women never features in employment or poverty estimates, yet it is critical to household well-being. So better data on women and girls isn't merely a technical detail. It's essential to ensure they aren't excluded from India's development story.
Right. And before I wrap up, I would like to have a final comment from you on why do you think census, I know you have said this before, but why is census important for a country?
Census for any country is important, but for a large country and for the world today, including India, where things are changing so fast and are so uncertain. In fact, I feel right now the only certainty is uncertainty. So, if you look at climate change and how it's impacting us, look at population, the rapidly changing population dynamics, or if you look at AI and digitalization, it is the most important aspect of not only planning and policies, but also how you allocate resources. You allocating resources and giving financial resources is completely dependent on the numbers. Then in India, where urbanization has taken at a rapid, the increase in terms of urbanization as well as migration, for us to plan, we need to know the numbers. Finally, India is an aging society. India is meaning we are going to increase our people who are aged by almost double in the next 20 years. So we have to plan, for an aging society. You can't let them age and then start the planning. So, given the rapidly changing environment, planning, allocation of resources, targeting the poor, targeting those who are marginalized, and that is the objective, the whole purpose of having a caste census is to invest in the most marginalized. And, in India, we keep saying we are able to reach programs to the better off and to the better off amongst the poor, but not the poorest. And finally, politicization of whether it's numbers and so on will decisively, we will be able to say, those of us, for instance, who've been saying that the Muslim population is decreasing, at the fastest rate in the last two census, and this census, since it's taken 16 years, will decisively tell us how much the decrease is, and is it correct, because it's being used to divide society. So politics without evidence and numbers tends to take a rather negative, ugly, and sometimes destructive turn. So it's a good. It's not only good, but it's a win-win situation to have a data-based policy planning mechanism.
Right. Professor Sanjay, as Poonam pointed out about the importance of this fast changing population statistics, in the future, do you see? I mean, this is just a radical thought. Can the government think of reducing the, say, 10-year period to conduct census to like shorter spans so that we have like more faster and accurate data of how the society is changing?
My own sense is that that's not required because it's a tedious process. It doesn't happen overnight. And yes, the world is changing very fast. There are changes which is taking place much faster compared to what we had imagined. But I think these are for long-term planning. The census data, it has been put very eloquently by Poonam ji that, why do you need a census? What is the utility of the data? What do we do with the census? It's not merely counting number of people. The entire policy formulation of government depends upon information, and census collects a very large number of information which is very, very valuable for the government for implementing various kinds of policies. So I don't think, yes, you could think the government might think of having it done every 5 years. But my own sense at this moment is that maybe it's an appropriate time to do census every 10 years. It is important to do it regularly, and we should make sure that there is no break in the census as we see in the delimitation. There are issues with regard to delimitation. I can imagine that there may be some issues with regard to this census, because when you count the caste, as soon as the number about regarding the caste comes out, what proportion of people belong to different caste, there could be some discussion, some Pandora box regarding that. So it is important to continue doing the census every 10 years rather than thinking of reducing the interval from 10 years to 5 years.
Right. Thank you so much for coming to the Hindu and participating in this lucid discussion. We all came out very enlightened. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you.